Good afternoon, and thanks for joining us. I'm Judy Simpson. As we close out another week here on Across the Fence, it's time to open up our 60th anniversary archive. Today we'll hear from Mark Bowden, best known for his book Black Hawk Down. Bowden visited Vermont in 2000 when he attended Norwich University's Military Writers Symposium. He sat down at the Northfield Inn to talk about his career and Black Hawk Down with former Across the Fence host Tony Adams.
My book is about a battle which took place about 7 years ago in Mogadishu, Somalia, when a small force of American soldiers found themselves trapped in the streets of Mogadishu, surrounded literally by thousands of heavily armed Somalis. And they fought for 15 hours before they were rescued. Most of them made it out alive. 18 American soldiers were killed, and something on the order of 500 to 1,000 Somalis were killed.
Pretty long firefight, isn't it?
It was the most significant and sustained combat that American soldiers have been involved in really since the war in Vietnam. And actually, you know, I've met Vietnam veterans and they're hard-pressed to remember a battle, a firefight that was this intense and that lasted this long.
Was it mostly small arms?
Mostly small arms, yes. The American forces were made up of Rangers from the 75th Ranger Regiment down at Fort Benning, and they carried light anti-tank weapons and basically, automatic weapons like M16s. The Somalis had M16s and AK-47s and were using rocket-propelled grenades.
Mm-hmm. Mark, let's go back just a little bit to refresh our memory. What were the Americans doing there? What was their mission?
We first intervened in Somalia in December of 1992 to end a famine that had been caused by civil war, infighting between warlords in Somalia. Everything in the country had broken down. There was no economy, no agriculture, so people were starving to death. But when international relief agencies sent food, it was being seized at the port by Somali warlords who were really using starvation as a weapon against each other. So the United States intervened with other UN troops to end the famine, to open up the ports, and to deliver food to the people who were starving. Mm-hmm. This battle resulted because efforts to create a kind of a coalition government in Somalia broke down when one of the chief warlords, named Mohammed Farah Aidid, began attacking UN peacekeepers. So we sent this elite force of American Rangers and Delta Force to try to capture Aidid, or capture the people around him at any rate, to remove him as a military threat in mm-hmm. Somalia.
How long were American troops there?
Well, the intervention initially began in December of 1992. The force that I'm talking about, Task Force Ranger, which had a more direct military mission, arrived in Mogadishu in August of 1993 and stayed until late in the year of 1993. And by the middle of 1994, all American troops were gone from mm-hmm. Somalia.
Were you there during any of the fighting?
No, thank goodness I wasn't.
So you went there afterwards and decided to, you wrote a series of articles for the Philadelphia Inquirer, a paper that you work for.
That's right.
And you won a prize for that, the Overseas Press Club's Hal Boyle Award for Best Foreign Series. How many articles was that?
Well, that was a 30-part series that ran over a month in the Philadelphia Inquirer. And to research that, I had spent more than a year interviewing American soldiers who fought in Somalia on that day, and then I also had gone back to Somalia, to Mogadishu, to interview Somalis who fought against Americans that day.
What was their reaction about the Americans being there?
Well, initially, most Somalis were very happy when the United States intervened, because I think things had really broken down. The general public was starving to death. But by the summer of 1993, because of a variety of reasons, a lot of Somalis were angry when this military force came over. By military force, I mean Task Force Rangers' mission was a strictly military one, not a humanitarian or peacekeeping operation. They were there to target this warlord and his key lieutenants and try and arrest them and remove them from the city. This, of course, antagonized all of their followers. So by the summer of 1993, that initial welcome that Americans
had
received
worn out, huh?
had definitely worn out.
Yeah. And these were elite troops. They were Rangers, right?
Rangers and Delta Force. Rangers are, the premier light infantry unit in the Army, made up of relatively young soldiers, 18, 19, 20, 21 years old, but who are kind of the cream of the crop of the young soldiers in the Army. But with them was Delta Force, which is the elite counterterrorism unit, made up of very veteran, mature soldiers, average age of about 30, who've been in the Army for 10 years or more, and who train specifically for these kinds of rapid snatch and grab missions or hostage rescue missions.
Mark, you said that you interviewed Rangers or Delta Force people who were involved in the action.
Right.
Now that it's over and with time you interview them, what was their reaction to the whole thing and how did they feel about it?
Well, I think all of them were very proud of the way that they managed to conduct themselves, and I think if it weren't for their exceptional courage and professionalism, that they all would have died in Mogadishu that day. They're bitter about the fact that the mission that they were sent over there to do and that led to this big battle on October 3rd and October 4th was canceled when Congress and the President were outraged that 18 American soldiers had been killed. So this left a lot of the men who fought in this battle with the impression that their friends had been killed and that they had been through this terrible experience for no reason.
No reason at all. Were they in the center of the city? Did they have an enclave that they were protecting or just trying to survive?
Well, they found themselves really in the center of the city. They had gone in to conduct a raid, to interview a couple of the warlord's chief lieutenants, and it had gone pretty much without a hitch until one of the Black Hawk helicopters that delivered the force was shot down. At that point, the whole force on the ground was forced to move to the downed helicopter to try to rescue the crew and to recover the bodies of the pilots. And so at that point, they were basically hunkered down in a neighborhood in southern Mogadishu where they had not anticipated being, and they were surrounded by literally thousands of Somalis.
Thousands of Somalis against 99 Americans?
That's right.
And they survived.
They did. They did because they knew how to establish a perimeter. They knew how to control their fire. They were much better trained than the Somalis who were attacking them, and they had helicopters.
And that's a story that the title conveys, Black Hawk Down. That means one of the helicopters was shot down.
That's right, a Black Hawk helicopter.
And is that one of our premier helicopters?
It's the premier sort of troop-carrying helicopter for light infantry. There are other kinds of attack helicopters, but Black Hawks are bigger than the attack or combat helicopters. They're meant to carry anywhere from a dozen to 20 soldiers into, behind the lines or to drop them into particular places.
So your story is sort of a documentary of the people who fought, the people they fought against during that firefight.
Right. Literally, Black Hawk Down, page 1 begins with the launching of this mission, and it ends some 350 pages later when the last of the force is extricated from the city. And the story is told through the eyes of the American soldiers who fought there and also the Somalis who fought against them.
Sounds like gripping action to me.
Well, I hope so. The book has been a very happy success for all of us, and I'm really pleased that what Black Hawk Down has done is it's sort of reinserted this episode into our popular memory.
And the hardback came out when?
In March of 1999.
And it's now in paperback?
Yes, it is. It came out in March of this year, 2000. It's been out for about a month.
Great. Let's go back just a little bit. You wrote some books before this one.
I did, yes.
You want to tell us about them?
Well, the last book I wrote before Black Hawk Down is called Bringing the Heat, which was just reissued in paperback, and it's actually a book about pro football. I spent 3 years as a reporter of the Philadelphia Inquirer covering the Philadelphia Eagles, which is Philadelphia's pro football team.
Right.
And took a lot of notes, and at the end of 3 years wrote a book about what it's like to be a pro football player, coach, owner, what that whole world is about. My first book was called Dr. Dealer, and it's about a young man in Philadelphia, a dentist, who became one of the most successful cocaine dealers that the FBI ever discovered. He was captured, escaped with his wife and children, lived as a fugitive for several years until he was recaptured. His name is Larry Lavin. And Larry's actually from up here, New Hampshire way.
Is he?
But he's now in prison where he'll be for, I'm afraid, quite a while.
Right. What was the reaction of the players to bringing the heat?
Well, some of them thought it was great. Some of them were not terribly thrilled. It kind of depends on how they came off. It was an exciting season. It was a fun group of guys, people like Randall Cunningham and Reggie White and Seth Joyner and Andre Waters, a real colorful cast of characters. Buddy Ryan was the coach for the 1 year that I covered them. And so I've heard from some of the players who really get a kick out of the book and others who were less than thrilled.
Yeah, you're going to get that reaction if you try to be honest about everything, aren't you?
I think so. It's hard to write honestly about people and keep them happy all the time.
Sure. You had complete access to them?
Well, I spent 3 years with them, and I used to spend my off seasons traveling to their hometowns and getting to know their families and high school coaches. And one thing you discover is that after you've sat across the kitchen table from a 21-year-old with his mother telling him to keep his hands off the cake, when you see him in the locker room, it's hard for him to look down his nose at you. So it was time well spent.
Right. I understand that you're involved in the screenplay for Black Hawk Down. You want to tell us how that writing differs and where you are in the screenplay?
Well, Black Hawk Down, the movie rights were purchased by Jerry Bruckheimer, who's a fairly big-time Hollywood producer. He's made movies like Armageddon and Enemy of the State or Top Gun, which was a military movie. And I'm one of the screenwriters. I did the first adaptation of my book to a screenplay. And really, it's a big challenge because it's a different medium. The battle itself took place over 15 hours and has hundreds of different characters. So for a film, you need to condense it quite a bit. You need to focus on 2 or 3 main characters. And because you're focusing so intensively on 2 or 3 main characters, you're basically creating dialogue and scenes. So it's really probably the most significant fiction writing that I've ever done, even though it's based on a true story.
Based on a true story, but it has to be fictionalized at points.
It pretty much does, because Black Hawk Down is very detailed in accounting for the battle. But I think in order to develop characters who the audience will care about in a film, you have to literally create scenes where they're engaged in activities or dialogue in far more detail than the book ever got into.
Yeah.
So it requires a certain amount of creative license.
Your research to do this, you talked to people from one side, soldiers from the other side. Did you have to do any historical research in the country?
Sure, I had to, I did spend a lot of time trying to understand the modern history of Somalia, and also the history of America's, light infantry units and Delta Force, where they came from, who these people were, how they train, and what their reason for existence is. I spent a lot of time studying the episodes or the sequence of events that led to the United States intervention in Somalia. Even though my book focuses exclusively on the battle of October 3rd and 4th, I had to do a lot of research to understand how and why it took place and what happened afterwards.
How long did it take you to write it?
Well, the writing took about a year and a half, actually. The whole project took about 3 years.
Any down spots as far as writing is concerned? You talk about writer's block occasionally. You're going well, and all of a sudden, it's tough.
I don't find it that way. I've been writing for a long time, and it's my job. And there are some days when it's a little easier to do than other days, but I always manage to get some words down. Lately, with the success of Black Hawk Down, the problem I've faced is that I'm in such demand to talk about the book that I'm trying to get another book written, and I'm so busy traveling and answering questions, it's hard to find time to write.
Like this show.
Exactly. Yeah.
What is the book you're working on now?
I'm working on a book that's entitled Killing Pablo, and it's about the successful effort in 1992 and 93 to track down and kill the Colombian drug lord Pablo Escobar, which involved a fairly significant American effort.
Where have you gone for that?
I've been to Colombia, traveled quite a bit around Colombia, but most of the work and research I've done is here in the United States, traveling to meet with Americans who took part in that effort.
So you're interviewing a lot of people then?
Yeah, for the work I do, I almost always have to interview quite a few people.
Well, as a reporter, you're dealing with nonfiction, and you seem to have found your milieu with the success of Black Hawk Down. You feel that way?
Very much so. I mean, Black Hawk Down is a sort of a logical step in my progress as a writer. I started as a newspaper reporter, writing cop stories and writing little daily newspaper articles, and gradually over the years worked myself into more and more complex, lengthy stories. In fact, I've been a pain in the butt to many a newspaper editor over the years because I always wanted to write longer than they wanted to let me. Graduated to writing full-time for magazines, and eventually I was writing series for magazines.
Sure.
And now what I do are these long-term, complex stories that turn into books.
Mark, our time is just about up. I want to thank you very much. Enjoyed it talking to you.
Thank you, Tony. I enjoyed it too.
Author Mark Bowden with this book, Black Hawk Down, A Story of Modern War.